What is up, LobotomizeGang? Is the guy. You know, the guy who definitely doesn't hear voices inside his head. Something you need to know about me is that despite making a bunch of videos on it, I tend to avoid the roguelike genre like the plague. You know, games that base their premise on being infinite and endlessly replayable just don't jive well with me. I like my games how I like my women. Beatable. So it is nothing short of a miracle that I found myself loving Hades 2 as a god meeting, frog petting, eat to brew pressing, randomized power up requiring, good gameplay mechanics having, sometimes frustrated feeling, getting confused from dying over and over again, but you're not sure if it's because you're bad at the game or because the RNG system didn't give you the right power for your build. But we all know it's because you have a mental capacity of a geriatric sloth. Developed and self-published by Supergiant Games, the studio behind these emotional roller coasters of indie darlings. Supergiant Games holds a special place in my heart because, with the exception of the first Hades, I have managed to play and finish every single one of their games, back when my lower back didn't hurt and I didn't cry when I think about my future. From what I can remember about their games, aside from the blue meth tight gameplay design, these games offer a healthy, if somewhat unexpected dose of existentialism. They seem keen on exploring concepts surrounding humanity itself, often diving deep into relationships, connections shared between individuals, sacrifice, and how one person's decisions can affect others. If I had to, I would use the word touchy to describe these games, because they stir up my insides and make me feel things in places where I shouldn't. Released onto early access on May 6, 2024, many are adamant that Hades 2 is already well on its way to becoming another indie hit of the year. But I gotta say, in today's gaming landscape, wearing the early access tag can sometimes mean a game is immune to any criticism, no matter how valid, as pointing out any flaws means you are met with, but it's in early access and the devs can change it. An argument which I find ridiculous. I mean, just because you're a child doesn't mean you're immune to dumb hands when you mess up. Now scrub that toilet clean or I might have to show you the meaning of tough love. Now with all of that being said, despite being in its early stages, Hades 2 has absolutely zero business being this good. Though not as good as it could potentially be, not if the devs don't fix these glaring problems that we're going to look into in this video. The entire premise of the game revolves around taking down the Titan of Time.
Death to Kronos.
Fighting, dying, resurrecting, raging over and over again. You play as the daughter of Hades himself and princess of the underworld, pronounced Melinoi in Greek, which means a blob of white dough in English. Because despite being surrounded by a literal Greek pantheon of colorful and interesting gods and goddesses, our main character has the personality of a moldy piece of bread. If I give you a telescope, you probably couldn't find a shred of personality in that peeled potato wrapped in a dress. Even when victorious, the way she delivers her lines indicates nothing but boredom.
There.
I mean, this would be appropriate if we were at the very end of the game, after Melinoi has died and resurrected thousands of times, and was thus wary and unenthusiastic, not to mention ran through. But the woman sounds disinterested right off the bat, even before she started getting clapped. Melinoi is so boring that chaos, the literal embodiment of nothingness in Greek mythology, roasts the living shit out of her for being so bland.
As for your brother, I found him to be quite amusing. Interesting that offspring can be so dissimilar.
The reason for her lack of personality is tied directly into the development process of the game, which we'll be taking a look into in the development section of the video, but for now just keep that in mind, okay? However, it's worth noting that this is not the fault of the voice actress, Judy Alice Lee, who did an amazing job voicing the character. In fact, the entire cast did a fantastic job with the material they were given.
Already hit a wall. Knocked your scrawny ass all the way back here.
This is more of a slight on the writers and directors themselves, who I'm sure have a clear vision for our protagonist, just one that I fail to see. What I don't fail to see, however, is my channel getting demonetized if they keep making them like this.
Enough.
Whoa. Throughout your travels, you will encounter a plethora of prominent figures from Greek mythology. Unlike this guy, who says I'm milking trauma for views when I only wanted to talk about the situation, these characters you meet look good, are interesting, and worth interacting with. They offer a few lines of dialogue here and there upon meeting, which serve to bring the story forward as well as add some flavor to your runs. As somebody who has never played the first Hades, this is when I realized the true genius behind Supergiant's approach to roguelike game design. The one place where Hades 2 stands above all other roguelikes is its emphasis on story as opposed to the grind. However fair it may be, roguelike games often come with the penchant of sticking to a gameplay mechanic that is somewhat unique and trying their damnedest to milk the living out of his saggy cow titties with RNG and procedural generation, which doesn't happen in Hades 2. While the core gameplay still revolves around finding random items on each run, it is saved by the story aspect. As to my knowledge, after 10 hours of playing, every time you encounter an NPC, they almost always have something new to say about you, your situation, and even your last run where you couldn't see how you died because the visual effects were so insane. This breathes life and brings much needed variety to the game itself and the entire genre as a whole, because there's actually a goal, something to strive towards instead of mindlessly running around bashing your skull against the wall and waiting for the game to become better. As opposed to in real life, I try not to die in video games. However, in Hades 2, dying brings a sense of satisfaction, which is true for real life as well, I think. Firstly, it's because you only get to see how the story progresses after you fail. Melanoid must have murdered these people's relatives, because they don't even look at you until you die, even if you meet them twice. Secondly, it's fun to die, because of the mechanic of only allowing you to unlock new stuff when you die. So dying is essentially required for you to experience the full game. I will now attempt to explain the mechanics of this game by telling you guys about 3 of my expeditions. I unlocked the pickaxe in order to mine for silver, which is one of the many resources scattered randomly throughout the map. I then visit Muscle Mummy for the daily insult session.
Another failed attempt.
Whose barely contained disdainful remarks definitely don't point towards her going off the deep end.
All you ever did was fall out of her womb.
I also call upon the 3 fates, sacrificing what little drug money and drugs I have left. But like the Thai lady boy with the barely concealed 12-inch trouser Leviathan, that night she took from me everything and left me with nothing. The only option now is to move forward and start another run. This time it's Poseidon that appeared first and granted me 3 random power-ups to choose from, each affecting one of my 3 attacks. Since I was aiming to beat the first boss and reach the second map, I chose the most reliable and widely used ancient Greek weapon to ever be deployed on a battlefield, the bomb vest, which lets me detonate, blowing up everybody in the vicinity. With my superior firepower and agility, the monsters pose as much of a threat to me as a toddler. That is to say, seeing that I was recently dropped by the 3 fates, I chose to take the money path when presented with the option. These paths as well as their rewards are randomized throughout your runs, and you can only take a certain number of them before fighting the boss, so you might need to think carefully before making your decisions. After obtaining another power from Poseidon, I run into a mini-boss, and this is when the first problem of the game shows itself. See, some enemies have this yellow bar that represents their shield. When the shield is up, they take more damage and more importantly, cannot be staggered. This leads to situations where these wailing banshees just chase you down and scream in your face, but you can't do anything about it, because their attacks slow you down so you can't run away, and their shield is up so you can't stagger them. You are forced to just stand there, tank the damage and attack them until their shield is down, which leads to the other side of the problem, the staggering. Enemies that have no shield get staggered every time you attack them. This in turn trivializes boss fights, because you can stun lock the living shit out of them by just standing there and spamming normal attacks. Just look at this. Look! This is not a fight. This is a violation of rights. After some totally out of nowhere trauma dump from the goddess Demeter, she rewarded me with a shield that helps absorb 1 attack from the enemies. And since 1 attack can mean all the difference between a perfectly healthy laptop and one with a fist through it, this shield marginally increases our collective chance of survival. making short work of the monsters and acquiring an armor that gives 5 mana every second. Our chance of survival for this run have increased from slim to grim. This is because your all-important mana reserve is limited and only regenerates after a combat zone, so having passive regeneration is extremely valuable. Adding to that, I also upgraded my weapon to hit twice, essentially doubling the damage of my attacks. It is time to face the first boss of the game, who, despite her best attempts at trickery and deception, poses absolutely zero threat to the sheer magnitude of my power and was easily defeated without much difficulty. Triumphant, I make myself to the second level of the game, where my prominent cheeks got promptly clapped by a projectile that I couldn't see coming, even if my ancestor were to point straight at it. Before continuing with the second run, can we just take a little bit of time to talk about the visual of the game? Ask any person who's good at their craft, and I'm sure they will all agree that mastery over one field is hard enough as it is, let alone reaching the impossible level of perfection. But if perfection is impossible, then I fear we lack the definition to describe the visual of Hades 2. I'm not kidding when I say this is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the prettiest games I have ever seen. Although it is common knowledge at this point that video games awards are rigged and are worth less than the words coming out of a typical TikTok alpha male's mouth. Walking is for people who are broke. I would actually feel personally offended, like somebody break into my house and spit in my face, if Hades 2 doesn't win some sort of award for graphics. You know, it's either art direction or visual effects. As long as they win something, I won't have to escalate global tension with my racist remarks. Even with a reduction in quality from recording, you can clearly see how impressive the graphics is. From the art style, the character design, to the environment, everything looks great. No matter how cynical you are, it's difficult not to appreciate the amount of effort and level of artistry put into crafting such a mesmerizingly gorgeous game. Just like I appreciate all of my patrons, of which there is a single one. Special shout out to Oseyeris in the truly insane tier, who is the Giga Chat single-handedly keeping me from starvation. Thank you. If you guys enjoy what you see here, consider supporting me on the Patreon. Call it an experiment, okay? You guys get to observe the effects of insanity, and I get to be a menace to society. Win-win. And speaking of menace, you know what's a menace? The plague. What kind of plague are you talking about? Online individual that vaguely resembles NPC you encounter in every single video game, you ask? Well, the plague of overtuned visual effects that make it impossible to see what the enemies are doing even if they rub their bulge against your forehead. While not as bad as something like Neo 2 or Witchfire, a game which aims to turn your GPU into a pipe bomb every time you attack an enemy, the abundance of visual effects in this game do sometimes lead to moments of frustration. Make no mistake, these effects look fantastic, and they do a great job of conveying the necessary information, but when shit hits the fan and things get hectic, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the amount of visual effects on the screen. This brings us back to the second run, where I will further elaborate on this. I'm sure you guys can remember me sending my hard-earned cash to the Free Fates, only to get unceremoniously ignored. But in an ironic twist of fate, unbeknownst to everyone, they had slid into my DM while I was away. Upon resurrection from my most humiliating defeat, I discovered that the Three Fates have sent me a list of predictions, which are challenges that can be completed to unlock cool stuff. Adding to that, the resources I've gathered from my last run have allowed me to unlock the ability to find more resources to unlock even more cool stuff. And you guys remember earlier when I said I unlocked a pickaxe? Using the silver I had mined, I was able to acquire a new weapon, the British Special, which is incredibly fast and comes with the ability to throw multiple knives at once. Now you guys get what I mean when I say dying is required? Well, I'm sure some streamer with a bad case of swamp ass and more caffeine running through their veins than an entire Starbucks can speedrun the game using their toenails. But for the average, mentally stable human being who is not a degenerate, whether it's for the new stuff or the storyline progression, dying over and over again is an integral part of the experience. The only thing you'll be losing upon death is what little amount of self-worth you have, assuming you had any to begin with. With a chip on my shoulder, weapons in hand, and determination in my heart, I set out for the second run, on which I was greeted with the aspect of the moon herself, Selene. I swear to God it's not Selene, Selene. They say that in the game. Who offers 3 hexes to choose from. Consider this your ultimate move. You can only use a hex after you spend enough mana to damage enemies with your other abilities. Against my primal instinct to pick the laser beam of destruction, I choose the hex of chemical warfare, placing the enemy's food supply with crack cocaine, making them move 80% slower. See, with Melinoid's disgusting stick-like figure, standing in one place for anything longer than a millisecond means we will get folded faster than a lawn chair. We're looking for speed, and when Poseidon offered us with hands down the most overpowered buff in the game, Wave Strike, which lets our attacks damage and knock back enemies in the vicinity, in combination with the sheer speed of our attacks, means our puny burden knives have turned into a flamethrower. The only thing missing at this point is mana, which we happen to acquire. After making a little bitch out of the boss, Aphrodite appears and offers 3 powers. Now if you're thinking that we're here to have fun and try our best, then I suggest you cease your buffoonery and grow a set of huevos. No! We're looking for high yield, high profit, highly volatile crusade against the heretical forces of a false god. You go hard or you stay at home instead of the safe and rational option that is full health regeneration after every encounter. I chose to turn my throwing knives into a spas 12. At this point, with limited amounts of money and an overabundance of power, you wouldn't be at fault for wanting an upgrade to our meager 75 health. But brothers and sisters, must I remind you that we are not fighting for ourselves. We are casting judgment upon the forces representing instability and disorder, forces that seek to uproot our very traditions and debase our very way of life. To that end, we must rid ourselves of concepts such as safety or personal well-being and opt for the orbital cannon that will decimate any men, women, or children caught in its blast. We must go from participating in ancient warfare to committing modern war crimes. But as Isaac Newton once said, "Your mama's so fat, the only thing attracted to her are planets." Well, he also said, what goes up must come down. When faced with one of the most creative bosses who takes full advantage of the Greek mythology setting, I panicked, awestruck by the sheer competency on display, wondering how such a small studio can produce a product to rival that of 5 AAA companies combined. So long this trance lasted that I found myself blown to pieces and promptly returned to the shadows. Guys, just chill out a little bit, right? Before I throw this laptop out the window and burn my house down, right? To regain what little sanity I have left, how about we take a look at the audio section and the development section before finishing off the video with the final run, okay? Okay. If you ever had the pleasure of playing one of Supergiant's games before, your ears have no doubt been caressed by many of their enchanting songs. As always, the studio more than delivers everything I would expect on the audio front, especially the music. As someone who is prone to the occasional bouts of excessive, exaggerated verbalization, I am dead serious when I say that Supergiant Games have signed a real estate contract for their music to have a permanent spot in my head. And while having a zero chance against Transistor, the soundtrack for Hades 2 does its best to put up a fight for the spot. Nowadays, with greedy companies like Ubisoft constantly insulting us by vomiting out barely functional smelly pieces of garbage that they have the audacity to call quadruple A games, it's indie developers like Supergiant who makes their games with actual passion that we should look to for the future of gaming. According to some research, when planning to develop a sequel for Hades, studio head Amir Rao looked at Portal 2 and Diablo 2 for inspirations, as the studio didn't want to make something that can be considered a reskin of the first game. They wanted to expand on Hades in meaningful ways without losing the core of the original game, and with Melanoid being tied to the less explored occult side of Greek mythology, the devs were able to take the story in new directions as well as introduce new gameplay mechanics in the form of magic attacks of the protagonist. And speaking of, the brick wall that is Melanoid's personality, or lack thereof, is the result of her not being a prominent character in Greek mythology. Like literally, nobody cares about her and she's a nobody. Here's how the story goes. After the success of Hades, the team at Supergiant felt like they weren't afforded the room to thoroughly explore the full extent of Greek mythology. Due to the sheer scope of its material, many felt like there was much potential that would go to waste should the team decide not to make a sequel. So when plans are set for a sequel and the gears were in motion, lead writer Greg Kasavin got to work, digging into deep and unexplored crevices of Greek mythology, which was where he came across Melanoid, who, despite being the youngest daughter of Hades and Persephone, is treated like a family channel's adoptive son, that is to say, disposable. Okay, now that's done. The goal? Destroy the second boss to reach the third map. Using the resources I've gathered, I unlock the card to give 3 health and 3 mana after each encounter. While seemingly trivial in the grand scheme of things, this creates a snowball effect that would pay dividends in the long run. As we traversed the underworld, we also came across Nectar of the Gods, which I gave to this ghost, who in return granted me a ring that fully restores my health after each encounter. Now you might wonder why I didn't choose the giant axe that annihilates multiple enemies in a single hit, or the magical wands that shoot homing projectiles. I figure in order to beat the game and be a successful YouTuber, a person either needs to have godlike reflexes, to be a masochist, or possess high levels of autism. And since my level of autism is unrivaled by most, it is only logical that I give myself an advantage by adding masochism to the mix. And when Apollo was the first god I encountered who blessed me with infinite mana recovery when I stand in my magic circle, I knew that the next few hours of my life were going down the drain. Though I didn't encounter many buffs on this run, which made me a little more than uncomfortable. The buff Volcanic Flourish I received more than made up for it. Every 18 seconds, my throwing knives would create an explosion that deals a staggering 400 damage. You see, ever since I learned about the power of the Sure Shot Flurry, my body has been thirsting for it. So you can imagine the levels of joy I felt when I got the ability to throw all of my knives in a straight line, while also have the range increased. This, in combination with the explosion, turns our throwing knives into the equivalent of an intercontinental ballistic missile. I dismantle her with ease, ducking and weaving through the gaps of her attacks, hounding the witch at every step, treating her like a 1950s housewife. Now if you were to ask the average Joe on the street what an angel looked like, this is what most people would describe. But for a hot-blooded 6'2" virile omega male that is totally not a maniacal schizophrenic, this is what an angel looks like. At this point, every press of a mouse directly sends large quantities of dopamine to my brain. And even though our blitzkrieg kamikaze plan had gone out the window at this point, we had inadvertently turned Malinois into a German Leopard tank that is capable of deleting the boss health bar chunks at a time. Now once the boss defeated and the third map reached, I was presented with two options. Either submit myself to the whims of the gods, to kneel down and accept my fate as a submissive and forgettable E-tier side character in Greek mythology, or rise up to the occasion and write my own story in the blood and entrails of the enemies, to soak the pages of the next Odyssey and haunt the lyrics of the ancient hymns that are to be sung for generations to come. Are we looking to be immortalized, to be pioneers that push democracy forward, to unshackle our minds, to explore new horizon, to extricate, to liberate, to call the meek and bring civilization to the barbaric untamed masses? There is but one option. We rise! I think that there's a lesson here for all of us. A lesson about pride, the steep price of hubris, and the effects of prolonged untreated insanity. Should you buy the game? Well, you need two things, okay? Firstly, you need $30 because it's the price of the game. And secondly, you need to buy a toilet bowl and strap it to your ass because you're not gonna want to leave the seat when playing this game. The uncensored version of this video as well as extra content is on the Patreon. Subscribe and stay tuned to witness my gradual descent into insanity. 1 million subscribers and I will whip out my dick.